Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. I want to hear my voice. Testing, 1, 2, 3. I want to hear and understand what everything is being said. Testing, no testing. Testing, testing. I want to hear my voice. Testing, 1, 2, 3. I want to know why I'm so quiet. What everything is being said. Testing, no testing. Testing, and understand what everything is being said. Alright, so I need to figure out the audio, which is super quiet. I want to hear my voice. What is going on? Quiet. What everything is being said. Testing, no testing. And understand what everything is being said. Alright, so I need to figure out the audio, which is super quiet. What is going on? Testing. Talking and losing my mind. What is going on with you? Testing. Talking and losing my mind. Property. What is going on with you? What is going on with you? Alright. Can I hear what is happening today? Can I hear? Can I hear what you are saying to me? Can I hear what is happening today? Can I hear? All right. Can I hear
Testing.
what you are saying to me? Can I hear what is happening today?
All right. Final test. Want to see what's going on.
Testing. What you are saying to me?
All right. All right. Final test. Want to see what's going on.
Testing. What saying to me?
All right. All right. Final test. All right. Okay. Making sure everything is working like it should. All right.
To display the keys pressed in Blender onto your screen, you will need to install add-ons, such
No. Okay. All right. Just gotta check in, make sure everything is working. It says I got excellent connection. All right. It appears, and I say it appears, that everything is working like it should. So that is going to be really nice for us. Do 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 do. All right. Make sure I got everything up like I need it. So what are we going to be modeling first today? Drinks and cans for desk. That is a great place to start. Okay. Testing, testing, testing. If you're here watching in chat, go ahead and type in chat. Curious to see who's all coming and who's here. So, currently looking up some good ideas. I think I'm going to be pulling this one up. This is a cool design. All right. Cool, 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 cool. Going to give it probably another few minutes to see who all comes. And then we're going to go ahead and start this up. This is exciting. Just kind of taking a peek and planning out exactly what it's going to be designed. A few ideas running through my head right now. Some lab lights. I thought I've already done that before. We could do a fire extinguisher. That would be fun. security lights. What could we do? That one's going to be a little bit harder to do. We're almost done, so that's exciting. Aha, coffee pot maker. That's definitely what I'm going to be doing for this one. Great, 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 great. All right, awesome. Welcome. Welcome to the stream. It's exciting. Been planning on doing the stream for a while. I've been working as a designer for quite a long time, and this is one of the skill sets that I have that, you know, not everyone does have, right? And seeing that design and development and everything is really going in that direction. It's really great to be able to go ahead and sit down and create one of these streams and kind of go through that process within Blender and to showcase this stuff off, because you know we're going to be needing it for web design. We're going to be needing it. We're going to be needing it for animation. We're going to be needing it for a lot of stuff. So, welcome, welcome. All right, awesome. Yeah, with YouTube, YouTube is saying that this is going to be, I can have this uploaded, so I'll be able to do that. So that's exciting. So, but yeah, I'll kind of get into the basics. A wireframe class and a computational linear algebra. Cool, 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 cool. All right. So this is Blender. So when you open up Blender, you're going to have what's known as a scene. And I'll just delve right into Blender and operations. So with Blender, you're using your entire keyboard, you're using all your mouse essentially. There's a lot of customization that goes on to this. So Blender is a free software that you can use. It is absolutely amazing. It is a community-backed program. The alternative to Blender is going to be 3ds Max. It's going to be Maya. Programs like that run within, you know, 700 to thousands of dollars. If you were to look up Maya, you'd probably be shocked about the amount of prices that stuff is. And ironically, Maya just implemented features in 2020 that Blender has had for years now. So because Blender has this community-backed support, they have a lot of features that you can actually add on to. And you know, if you needed more features, you can always go into Edit, Preferences, and then Add-ons. And they have a lot of cool add-ons that you can add on here. And there's some that I've actually went ahead and selected to have on here. Some are already custom. One that I found useful is Mesh Loop Tools. That's something I can show a little bit later. That's a little bit more of a developed knowledge set within modeling and animation. But you know, starting off, we'll start small. We're going to start with simple cups, mugs, and then we'll go ahead and, you know, go up from there. So nothing too complex today. This is more so to show, you know, the workings of Blender, the way you would output files, and have that set up. So working with Blender, you coming into the scene. So navigation, holding your middle mouse wheel is going to allow you to maneuver within this program. Shift middle mouse is going to allow you to pan. Now let's say you've panned way too far over and your model's way over here. Well, if you were to go ahead and hit period on the numpad, that's actually going to take you directly straight back to your model. This is really, really useful for when you're working with a lot of different objects and you want to zoom in. Like, let's say you have a lot of different objects of different scales and sizes, and you had this specific piece that you wanted to look at specifically as you were modeling. You would just press period, and then you would just kind of take a peek at this stuff and kind of maneuver to see how that's going to look within your model. So Control Z, of course, undoes what you really would like to do with just undoing. It goes up to a maximum of 100 undos, just for, you know, your computer's sanity. I would recommend increasing the number of undos on Blender. If you're working with a complex model like a human character rig, or if you're working with anything that's going to have a lot of numbers of sides, it's always a good rule of thumb to increase it by a few hundred, maybe even 1,000, just to give you that leeway if something does go wrong, right? I've worked with models where I've made hundreds of alterations and I needed to go back to a very far previous one that I completely forgot that I was doing, right? So it's always important to go ahead and do that. So when coming into Blender, usually what I like to do is I like clearing my scene. So this is the basic light source you'll have in. You would get rid of that. This is the basic camera source. You would delete that. So that way all you're working with is the current model that you have right here. And usually even with that, I like deleting everything in the scene, including the cube. But I'll go ahead and showcase some of that stuff here in a second. So in terms of navigation still, you are going to use your numpad a lot. So let's say we're zoomed in here. 1 on your numpad is going to give you a front view. 2 is going to give you different views, but 3 is going to be a side view. 7 is going to be your top view. The other numbers will give you other views that you won't really use as much unless you're working with specific stuff on the model. Good rule of thumb is 1, 3, and 7. This is going to allow you to maneuver around your model a lot easier. Moving around your model, the G button on your keyboard is what's going to allow you to move your model. So if you hit G, you can maneuver it, you can move it up, you can move it down, side to side. You can maneuver it practically anywhere you want within the screen. So if you wanted to move it on a specific axis, you would press GX to move it on the X-axis, GY to move it on the Y-axis, and then Z for the Z-axis or Z for the Z-axis. So it's really important to work within that when you're working within your model. Now, there's a lot of troubleshooting when it comes to models that go wrong. So when you have models, when you're working within, Unreal Engine, if you're working within Blender or any other software, the very important note is that you would like to have its location be at the standard location, which is 0, 0, 0. For instance, let's say I have a copy of the same model and it's over here, and I have information that is from a high poly model that I want onto a low poly model. And I'll go into low poly and high poly in a second. If they are not both within the same section, you will not be able to actually use that information that you would need to bake into that model because the locations are not going to be the same. Because a baking information is going to bake from the location it's currently at. So you're going to want to make sure that it is at the same location in this destination. So I'll go into baking here now. So what do I mean by high poly and low poly baking? So when you work with modeling, the terminology you're going to see within low poly and high poly is the terms low poly and high poly, like I said. Low poly poly in short just refers to polygons. So let me go ahead and work within one thing within the scene. So I'm going to bring up statistics. So if you want to bring up the statistics of what you're working with currently, what you're going to go ahead and do is you're going to click this down arrow for the overlays, and then you're going to click statistics. You're going to see your polygon in the left-hand corner. Blender automatically cuts your polygons in half, which are known as triangles, and that's going to be located here. So your poly count is going to be half whatever your triangle count is going to be. So when you look in an actual model, I'm going to go in edit mode for this because this is going to make it easier. We have a simple cube. And with a cube, we have 6 faces or 6 polygons. A polygon references a face on a model. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I were to go and delete a face, you could actually see inside of this model right here. And this is very important because when you're working with animation, when you're working with different programs that are going to be using models, you want to have your models as low poly as you could possibly get it. Models within the industry are defined within a number of categories, usually small, medium, and high, or depending on what they're working on, clutter objects, just objects in general. And then you would have your larger objects that you would have for your characters. You would have various other things. For your clutter objects may range from maybe 100 to 250 polygons. If you have a character, let's say you had a human character you've created, he may be about 30,000 to 50,000 polygons. Now, Why is this important? Why is high poly and low poly important? So if something is too high poly, and I'll show you what a high poly object is going to look like. So a high poly object, and we're going to rename this high poly. To rename something, you're going to double click it in the scene selection where the name is at, and then you can just type high poly. And usually you're going to want to name it like that. And I'll go into naming conventions in a second with how we're going to name. But so we're going to go into a modifier tab, and I'm going to be adding a modifier to go ahead and subdivide this, so that way we can go ahead and have a lot more division within this. And this is going to look very warped because there's something called supporting edges that are going to be needed, and that is something that has not been added on there, and that is not good. So as you can see, as I increase the subdivision, it is actually increasing the poly count, as you can see right here in the left-hand side. So we're going to go in edit mode, and I'm going to select it. So as you can see, all of these are polys. So this is one poly. You see here within the edges? So that's 1, 2, as it goes through. So there is about 1,500, a little over 1,500 polygons within this actual object. And as you saw, this was originally a cube. And that's because within this cube, there was no supporting edges. So if this did have supporting edges, this would still look like a cube. But let's say you wanted to go ahead and add like mingled scars and warped damage to it from your high poly. You can actually take the information that you create within a model for that damage, the scars, all that stuff from your high poly, and you can do what's known as baking. So what you're doing with baking is you're taking all the data and information from a high poly model, and you're having it wrapped around a low poly model. A great example of this would probably imagine taking a cube, and you have a cube, and you go ahead and paint this cube, and you're painting the cube to make it look like it's got a 3-dimensional surface to it. So it may have like cracks in it. You may make it look like it's got, a hole in it because you're a really good artist, right? So what you're doing is you're masking it with this high poly bake to give it the illusion of having more detail in it than it actually does. In fact, the entire course of 3D modeling is creating definition and models in an object that you don't really realize it's not actually there. A lot of this actually comes into in the texturing process. You can actually texture stuff without having to do baking or high poly stuff. But when it comes down to it, if you're working with a lot of different objects, you really want to be working with high polys being baked into your low polys, because you can't afford to have an animation that's all high poly information, because the more information that it has for a high poly, the longer an animation is going to take to render out. So let's say you went ahead and had, let's say the sphere was in your animation, and you're going to render out the sphere as like a bouncing ball. Well, it's going to take longer for a high poly to render out, because the lighting information you're going to have in your scene is going to have to compute every single individual polygon on here with the lighting information being bounced on it. The lighting information that's being bounced onto this object is going to be reflected throughout the course of that rendering animation. So it's very important when you're actually rendering that stuff out to make sure that you're working within low polys with what you're doing. Now I'll go into supporting edges now. So why did I add this modifier? Did it just turn into a ball? Why did it not stay as a cube? Well, that's a very good reason. So when you are working with models, you need to add something called supporting edges. Now, when you bring your model into, say, Unreal Engine, or maybe Unity, or even texturing softwares like Substance Painter, or a sculpting software like ZBrush, a lot of different softwares may apply what's known as a smoothing modifier. So if you were to right click on your object, you have all these nice little settings here, and you have shade smooth and shade flat. The default for models for objects that are brought into a scene are going to be shade flat, unless otherwise told otherwise with information that's been brought in previously. But you're going to right click, and if you were to shade smooth, you would see the model gets really distorted within its shading and its colors. The reason why it looks this way is there's no supporting edges with your model. So if we were going to edit mode and we were to add supporting edges to this model, if you were to hit Control R while on your model, hovering over it with your cursor, you're going to see an outline of a yellow line, which is going to be creating an edge. Now, if you were to click it, it's going to turn orange, and it's going to allow you to maneuver this edge anywhere you would really want. Now, keep in mind, every edge you create creates more polygons. So if you see here on the square, you can see that all these new faces are being created with this. So always keep in mind that, the more edges you create, the more faces you create, the higher your poly count is going to be in the end. So when you're really modeling, you're also doing math in your head, trying to compute, okay, how many faces is this going to be in the end? How can I get the size down to a smaller poly level so that way it's going to compute much better? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start adding some supporting edges. A supporting edge is what's going to add an extra supporting line to the edges of certain objects. So if you wanted to have hard, sharp edges on certain models while you're applying smoothing information to it, you need to have these supporting edges. Imagine having a beam. Now, a beam, if you were just to place it with no braces or anything, it's just going to collapse in on itself, which is why we need to add braces to a beam to make sure that that beam is going to stay in place and hold the formation we need it to stay. Supporting edges are very similar within that same type of idea. So what we're going to be adding are these small supporting edges around the edges of the object. And as you see me add more supporting edges into this object, it's actually changing the color slightly because it's allowing it to keep its shape. Now I'm going to press 7 on the keyboard, and that's going to allow me to look from a top-down view. I'm going to add some more supporting edges. And we're going to go ahead and make sure it's nice and uniform as we go through this whole process. So we're going to add some at the top. We're going to add some at the bottom. And then we're going to check the sides. I'm going to make sure everything has what we need it to. And it looks really good. This is a good cube. And we're sitting at about 54 polygons, which is not bad. It looks really clean. It looks really sharp. And now, if we were to go add and subdivide our surface and continue subdividing it, it maintains its shape. And it maintains its shape because we have those supporting edges within our model. So at this point, does anyone have any questions regarding what I've covered so far? I'll give a brief pause so that way people can see. Okay, well, I'm going to continue on. If you guys have questions, please post them in chat. I am happy to cover any specific thing, and we can kind of go at it like that. So let's say we don't have a cube in our scene. Let's say we have nothing in our scene right now. How do we add stuff in our scene to get started? How do we get going with what we really would like to do? Well, if you were to hit Shift A, that's going to allow you to add an add panel. And you have a lot of different things you can add here. You can add a camera. You can add armature, which is going to be rigging for characters. You can add text if you wanted to create text for an actual animation. You can add curves and different loops, metaballs. But in this instance, we're going to be working with meshes, and we're going to be implementing a cylinder. So we're going to go ahead and click a cylinder here, and that's going to create a cylinder in our scene. Now, our cylinder has not been fully committed to our scene yet. As we'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Add Cylinder panel here. We're going to go ahead and click that, and the default vertices is set at 32. Now, I'm going to be creating a cup. This cup is going to be very small, and it's going to be used in various scenes in the background, so it's not really going to be at the focal point of my scene, so it's going to be considered a clutter object, and it needs to be very low poly, so that way the scene can render out quite quickly. I'm going to go ahead and drop the count down to 16 to see what this looks like. And I want to go ahead and add a little bit more to it because I would like to have a little bit better dimension to this. So we're going to add 18, and I think 18 is going to work with what we want to work with here. And currently, it is set to be an ingon. Now, what is an ingon? An ingon is a term that you hear within the community, and you have people that either don't care about it, or you have people that actually hate ingons entirely. An ingon is going to be a face that has more than 4 sides. Ingons are sometimes not able to be computed within various programs, and that's going to make it to where these ingons actually will not show visibly on their faces within a scene. So you may have a model that has all these patches and holes in it that you can see right through it because it's got ingons on it instead of a unified face. And this is a problem. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, instead of an ingon, we're going to do triangle fan if we were wanting to not use an ingon. Now, for the case of what we're working with right here, and since it's a clutter object and I'm not too worried about it, and since it's the top part of it, I'm going to go ahead and select ingon, and it's going to generate UVs. Now, we have a cylinder here. How do we make this into a cup? Well, before we even get into the phases of, delving into cups, making sure the cups are how they're supposed to be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up reference images. Now, there's a lot of good cups out here. There's coffee cups. There's simple party cups with solo drinks. But what I'm going to focus is just a simple reusable cup that you would have for coffee or you would have for tea or whatever you would really have. So this is going to be what's known as a reference image. This reference images is something that I'm going to have in a side monitor that's going to be out of view, but it's something I'm going to be referencing throughout the course of modeling this creation. So looking at the two different models, I can see that there's a height difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press 1 to get a good view of the height, and I'm going to press S, which is going to allow me to resize this, and I'm going to press Z, which is the Z axis, and that's going to allow me to maneuver the height. So I'm going to go ahead and maneuver the height and adjust it like this. Now, I'm going to switch into edit mode, since I'm going to be doing a lot of editing with this object. I'm going to switch to face, and I'm going to move down to the bottom and select the bottom face. I'm going to press 1 again, and I'm going to press S, and this is going to allow me to scale this thing in slightly. I'm going to make sure that I have a good scale here, so that way it's nice and even. If you remember, Control R, which is your supporting edge, or your control, or your loop. And we're going to bring that down, and then we're going to expand this out to go ahead and get a nice bevel. And then I'm going to Control R again. I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to bring this out like that. This is going to allow me to get a nice, good, clean bottom here for what I want to do. Now, since this is going to have some sharp edges, I'm going to have to go back here in the end and add some supporting edge loops with what I want to do. But at the moment, I'm not going to really focus on that too much. Now, I'm going to press 1 in GZ. I'm going to bring that up because I want that to be about there, because I think that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to press the edges, which is going to be right here, which is going to be vertice, edges, and faces. Now, a vertice is something we have not talked about yet. A vertice is going to be singular points within your object. Each line is connected by a vertice, or each vertice is connected by a line, my apologies. And each vertice is going to be connected by just lots of dots throughout the entire creation of this thing. So if you want to move a particular aspect of your model, you just press G and maneuver this however you would want to have this set up. Since we're not going to be using vertices much within this model, I'm going to be sticking with faces and edges. So I'm going to press 1 to get a side view again. I'm going to press Control R to get my control loop, or my edge loop. I'm going to bring this up and bring it out there. Now, I want to select the edge loop going around the top area here. To do that, I would press A, Shift, left click, and that's going to select that top area. I'm going to press 1 to go ahead and get this view again. And I'm going to press S to bring this out just slightly. I'm going to hit Control R to bring this up. S to scale in. And then I want to get a good view of this, so that way we can get the right areas in like we want it to. And I'm actually going to bring this up slightly because within this model with what we're working with, we're wanting to have this up a little bit bigger. So I'm going to press S. In fact, I'm actually going to reselect these and bring it up because I don't think this is working how we want it to quite yet. Great. And so far, this is looking really good, but we're wanting to go ahead and have the face, which is right here. And we want to create a bevel, which is going to pop up the top. How are we going to do that? Well, if we press I, with the face selected, what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to inset on our model. So we're going to inset slightly, and it's going to do this. And it's going to create a brand new face inside this. Now, what I want to do from here is I'm going to press E, which is extrude, and I'm going to pull it up and extrude the model upwards. And it's going to do this. So far, our model looks really good. Though I feel like the bottom of this area could be slightly smaller inside. I'm going to switch to wireframe mode in the top right-hand corner, which is going to give us a wireframe of our general model. I'm going to hold left click and drag to select the bottom of the model, press S to rescale it, and I'm going to size it in slightly. I'm going to move back into the viewport shading mode and take a peek at my model currently. So far, it looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to inset once again on the top because we're going to start adding supporting edge loops, and the top is going to need a supporting edge loop. If I was not to add these supporting edge loops and just hit Shade Smooth, the model would look like this. And it would look very, very distorted and very odd. And that's not something we want. So we're going to go ahead and go back into the edit mode. I'm going to press I. We're going to inset slightly to add that supporting edge loop. We're going to go back into edge mode, and we're going to add supporting edge loops throughout this model. So I'm going to do that really quickly right here. Once again, I made an error there, so I hit Control Z. Really quick way to fix that. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Since we're not going to be seeing the bottom of this cup, I'm not going to bother adding an edge loop at the bottom for supporting, because that's actually going to help cut down on the edge loop area. But so far, this looks really good, and I'm quite happy with how this came out. So if I was to hit Shade Smooth on the cup in the end, the cup was to look like this. And in reference, we're referencing this image right here. So I'm going to press 1. I'm going to press G, Z. I'm going to bring it up here. So far this is looking really good, but I made one tragic mistake. I forgot to save. If I had not saved my model this entire time and my program was to crash, I would have lost all my information. So we're going to save right away. To save, you go to File, Save As, and we're going to save to Desktop. And we're going to name this as Clutter, since this is a clutter object, Cup, and then we're going to name this as 1. Within modeling 3D models, you're going to want to name this as clutter underscore cup underscore 1. This is going to make it to where filing naming is going to be much easier, and when it's being read within certain programs, it needs to be presented in this manner. So we're going to go ahead and save as our Blender file, and we're going to start working on this again. Now, the issue with this right now is that this cup is actually quite large. A great way to reference this is to get an accurate human skeleton that's actually going to be proportionate to how a human is going to be within the system. So I'm going to import an FBX of a human that I was able to download called Vagard. So we're going to import this into the system. And it's going to take a few moments because, like I said before, Humans have a much bigger poly count. So you can see the silhouette of the human right here. And this is one of the largest coffee cups in the world. And this man is now drowning in it because it is so large. So what we need to do is make sure this coffee cup is in relative size to this human being. So we're going to select the coffee cup. We're going to press S once again, and that's going to allow us to scale down this coffee cup. We're going to press period to zoom in to see how accurate this coffee cup is in relation to what this is. If you wanted to, you could press the G and bring it down here and take a peek and see how relative this size would actually be, and you can scale it proportionately how you would want this size to be. Now, since I don't actually need this armature in this human, I can just delete it and remove it from my scene entirely. I have this coffee cup now, but it's not in the position I need it to. So for the location, I'm going to change it to 0, 0, 0. Now I'll press enter. And this is now the position I would like it to be. Now, I'll go over some simple troubleshooting things with models that can sometimes make them wrong. So sometimes you can have a model and it looks like it's inside out. You can see through it. And some of the problem with that is that your scale can have it as a negative. When your scale is a negative, it's literally making the scale of your model to be presented as being inside out. If it is inside out, that is a huge issue because the models are only represented from one view. If you were to view this inside out, you would actually be able to view through the model itself. And that's actually a problem. A great way to also troubleshoot to make sure faces are facing the right direction is to go back in overlays and click face orientation. Now, my model is actually looking nice and the face orientation is the right way. Now, if there was some faces on this model that were facing the incorrect direction, you would actually see red blotches on the faces that were facing the wrong direction because this would need to be fixed and amended. All you would have to do is select those correct faces and then flip those faces so that way they're all facing the correct direction. Now, I'm going to go ahead and remove the face orientation because I don't need that right now. So this model is pretty good. I like how it came out. I think this is a pretty decent model for what we want to have this implemented within our engine. However, so far with this model, it is not UV wrapped correctly. Now, what is UV wrapping? Well, I mentioned wrapping blankets and painting an object in terms of representation. Now, what I'm going to do with my model is I'm going to UV wrap it. And UV wrapping is essentially taking the faces and stretching it out over a plane so that way we can texture this correctly. So if you were to go into UV editing mode, it's going to create an actual nice plane here next to whatever your model is. So I'm going to press A, which is going to select the entire model, and you'll see it's already pre-UV wrapped, because if you remember when we entered our cylinder in, it had UV generated on it. However, the UVs are not going to be correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to press the breakpoint there, going to press View, Overlays, and then Stretching. So if you were to look at this model right here, you would see that there are, it looks pretty good. Now, if it was bright green, you would have issues. However, this is going to have overlapping, and we need to make sure that's mapped correctly. Now, if you were working on basic models, what you would do for unwrapping is just simply do this hand by hand and select what you would want and unwrap it. And you can just do wireframe mode and do this piece by piece. And you can unwrap it in a way to where you can have your model in the correct area. So you can have your lid there, you can have the bottom of your cup in another area, and you can just unwrap it based on that. However, there's Smart UV Project, and I like using this for smaller UV styled objects because it's going to cleanly put my model in a pre-UV generated way here. However, this is going to be a little bit harder for texturing, but that's okay because I have a general idea on how I want to go ahead and texture this since I'm using very limited vertices. It's always good rule of thumb to UV wrap this to UV unwrap this by hand, so that way it's there. Now, when I export this model out, it's going to provide this information with me, which is going to be really, really nice to work with. But we're going to go back into layout mode, And this model is now UV unwrapped. Now, where do we want this information to be located? Well, when you're working with models, you need to make sure that you have the proper file naming for making sure everything goes where it's supposed to. So we're going to open this folder up, and we're going to name it like we named our thing previously. So clutter cup 1. And then inside this folder, we're going to go ahead and add another folder known as the textures folder. Textures are going to be for when we texture this object out, and that's going to be very important later. File, export, FBX. And then we're going to go ahead and find that folder that we had earlier. So it's going to be clutter cup 1, and we're going to export as FBX. So we're going to look in the right hand corner here. If we were working with multiple objects, we would make sure we had selected objects selected for the object we wanted selected out, and we would export it according to how we wanted to have it exported. So we'd export the model out, minimize the window, and we're going to double check and make sure that this model is actually here. Now, this is showing up in the basic Windows 3D viewer. If this did not export out correctly, then this model will not be showing up here at all, or there might be components missing. However, just because it shows up in the 3D viewer does not mean that it's actually exported out correctly and that your settings are perfect. So what we're going to do is close this down. So far it looks good. So everything's been saved. And now we're going to move on to the texturing process. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Substance Painter. I'm actually disappointed. Substance Painter recently got bought out by Adobe. And sadly, they're incorporating it into their Adobe suite, and they're kind of merging it within their software. Yeah, my driver is not outdated. I literally updated it this morning. That is strange. No. I guess. All right. So this is Substance Painter. So to start a new project, we're going to go File, New. Since this is a small object, we're going to work with a 512 document resolution. Set to PBR metallic roughness. And then we're going to go back into our clutter object. Select our cup. Everything looks good. We're going to bring this in. And so far, this looks really good. Now, this is not like Blender, so moving the object around is going to be slightly different. So it's going to be Alt left click, and you'll be able to maneuver like this. And then we scroll in, and scrolling out is actually inverted as well. Now, if you were to work with this right now and actually start working, it looks good, but the information is not actually baked in yet. So to bake the information that we have in, even though we don't have a high poly, we still want to make sure the information that we are going to put on it is going to be baked correctly. So we're going to go to Texture Settings, Bake Mesh Maps. We're going to uncheck ID since it will not have a high poly. It's making sure that's set to 512 for the output. And we're going to bake selected textures. And it's going to be baking the thickness, position, curvature, ambient occlusion, world space map, and the normal map. And we're going to bake the selected textures. If you could see, there's some slight changes in terms of the lighting and shadowing. So, and what we're going to go ahead is, I've got some smart materials I've worked with here in the past. And we're going to apply some of these smart materials here. So I'm going to look for some nice plastic materials. We have some plastic dirty, and I'm going to test this and see how this looks. And I'm actually quite satisfied with this. I think this looks pretty good. I may test and see if there's a good styrofoam. And I don't have styrofoam. That's okay. But so far, this is looking pretty good. And I'm going to double check and make sure we don't have any other plastics I want to use. And then we have a plastic grainy, which is one that I'm actually going to be using for a different thing. So I'm going to be adding what's known as a black mask. A black mask is allowing you to mask certain areas of your model down that you want to use specifically. So I'm going to add a black mask right here. I'm going to click on Polygon Fill, and this is going to allow me to drag and drop and selectively fill in areas of this that I want. So I'm going to select this area. I'm going to drag this down to 0, and then I'm going to reselect this. I'm going to go back to paint mode, and I'm going to look and see how this came out. So as you can see, there's some slight issues there, and that's because the edge work with the lines could be better. So I'm going to take a peek. I'm going to start editing this out. Slow and steady. That way we make sure that our model is going to be as clean as we can possibly get this. I apologize for the coughing. Just double checking to make sure the model's looking nice and clean. And so far it looks pretty good. So, I actually want to change the color of the lid. And I'm going to drop down the folder, and I'm going to adjust the base. Scroll down. I'm going to look at the uniform color, and I can change this to yellow if I wanted to. And scroll through and see what color I think looks the best. And this is more of a personal preference thing. Making sure that you're getting the right color that's going to fit the theme of what you're wanting to work with. I'm going to desaturate this slightly. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the plastic base. I'm going to drop this down. See how different colors interact with each other. So far this looks good. As you can see, there's no area to actually drink out of this area in the top. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to add a fill layer, add a black mask, go back and click on the fill layer, and we're going to scroll up and we're going to remove color, and we're going to remove roughness. We're going to drop the height value down. We're going to go into alphas, and alphas are going to allow us to start scratching and using textures to give the ability to make it look like three-dimensional. So I'm going to scroll down and try to find something that I think is going to work with what I want. And I think this might be a good place to start. So I'm going to click on my black mask, select this. I'm going to scroll up slightly. And I'm going to click once into the model. Now clicking back, I can adjust the height value. I can make it come out of the model, or I can make it go back into the model. And this is going to allow me to give the illusion of height. Now I'm going to add color back into this. Drop this down to black. And I'm going to test to see what it looks like with and without color. I think this looks better with color because it gives a little bit more definition and makes it give the illusion that it's more three-dimensional and deeper than it is. So if you were to zoom out, it would look like that. Awesome, awesome. So far we've created a nice 3D model of a cup. I'm going to make sure to save this so I don't forget and lose this. Usually you want to start at the beginning. So cup 1. And then for this, I'm going to actually add substance at the end of it, so I know it's a substance file. Sorry about that. I'm going to double check to make sure my audio is back on. Cool. So we have a nice model here. So before I actually do anything with exporting these textures out, I'm going to render this. Give it a clear color. And we have a nice render of our cup. And I chose clear color here because if you did not have clear color, it has the default background that it has included. So we want to make sure that's clear. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to get a nice render of my cup. I'm going to click this magnifying glass here, which is our render settings. And I'm going to wait because as you can see, it's rendering right now. So I'm going to wait for a minute and let it render. And now it has the status of being done. I'm going to save the render. I'm going to save the render as clutter cup 1 underscore render. I'm going to go back into clutter cup 1. I'm going to save this into this file. And then I'm going to back out by clicking the camera icon. We are now ready to export this out. We're going to press File, Export Textures, 8 bits plus dithering, and we're going to select our output directory, desktop. We're going to scroll down, or actually scroll up. I'm used to going somewhere else. Clutter Cup 1, and then we're going to click the Textures folder because we want all of our textures to be contained within this folder. We're going to click Select Folder. Now we need to choose a correct output template. Outputting it in different ways is going to give a different output file map. So when you output a texture file, there's going to be different types of textures. There's going to be a height map, which is going to show the height value, whether how deep or high something needs to be on a model for the definition. There's going to be color or the base color map, which is going to allow you to have the general base color. And there's going to be various other maps of different types throughout the entire model, depending on what you're working on. So there's a few different options you can choose. You could choose PBR metal roughness, which is going to give you emissive, which is brightness and colors, which is not something we're using here. Height, normal map, metallic map, roughness, and base color. Now this is a good map to export with, but I'm going to be choosing Unreal Engine 4 Packed with what I'm using, which is going to give me emissive, normal, metallic and roughness baked into a singular map, and then the base color map. I'm going to go back into settings, and this is going to allow me to export to my textures map. So I'm going to press texture or export. And as you can see, it exported files and it successfully finished those export files. And we can now exit out. Before closing out of the program, you want to make sure that the cup has the textures inside of it. And this is what a texture map is going to look like. A texture map is essentially taking it and moving it to a plane of that surface. If you remember, this is what the color of the cup looks like. But if you were to pull it off like a blanket, it's going to look a lot like this. So this is that height map, if you remembered. So we added that height definition there. This is the metallic map. Even though it is black, this is very important to still include because it tells how dark, how shiny this should be. And since this is a cup, it's not going to be that shiny. And this is a normal map, which is also very important as it has a lot of useful information that's going to be included there. And then another roughness map which is going to show the roughness that's going to be included in this object that may or may not be metallic. Such as plastic will be shiny, but it's not going to be metal. So far I'm very satisfied. This has been exported correctly. So your final output for a file is going to have the file, which is an FBX. It's going to have a render of the cup, which is what this is supposed to look like, which is incredibly important because if we're going to be using this in Blender for an animation software as a company, it's very important that we have this render there because it's going to allow us to see what it should look like when it's actually in Blender. And then we have a folder which is going to contain all of our textures. And then we'd be able to re-import this information back into Blender. Now, it just depends whether this is going to be done by hand or whether this is going to be done by some sort of third-party software that's going to export it in, which is going to make it easier. But at this point, this has been filed correctly, it's named correctly, it's been UV wrapped, textured, and has gone through the proper workflow to fit with what we want to have it done. And we have a Clutter Cup 1 that has been completed. So far, we've completed a nice cup. Now, if you wanted to, you could always add more information within cups. You can always add height values on dirt. You can make the height value bigger, deeper for this. You can add damage to the edges. Plastic could have different roughness values to it. Scratches could be deeper. You can add some definition to your cup like that. And then if you wanted to, for your lid, for the base, you could scroll down to roughness, and you can make it quite shiny. You can make a shiny cup with what you want. That's a little too shiny, though, so I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to make it metallic, so if you want a metallic lid that's slightly metallic, you now have a nice metallic ability to this. Almost like it's aluminum. But I might add the roughness value and make it down a little bit, so it's still metallic, but just not as rough. So there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize this. I have a very complex tutorial series on Substance Painter right now. So if you ever wanted to take a peek at that and see how you were to go through that process, that's always available for you to use at this point. So hopefully this answered a lot of your questions that you may have about 3D modeling. This is the first tutorial of a longer series that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be going into more increasingly harder depth of modeling and showcasing how to do complex things like desks, on how to do things like keyboards, and on how to do computer monitors and things of that regard. So this is the first step of a very long journey, and I'm very happy to have taken this with you.